It's always one of the regular questions comics get asked. You always get asked. People will ask you this when they're interviewing you. Well, what was your hardest ever gig? Now, thankfully, I haven't had too many. I've had a few. Any comic who says they haven't had a bad gig just doesn't gig that much. But I haven't had really that many. And when I've been asked in the past, I've invariably told an innocuous enough story about the night I played a bar in England, which I didn't know was full of British soldiers who just returned from a tour of Belfast. Let's just say I was not well received. I just about got out alive. But that wasn't my hardest ever gig. No. My hardest ever gig was one I did on the 15th of August, 1998, the day of the Omagh bomb. That evening, I'd been booked to perform in the Stand Comedy Club in Newcastle Upon Tyne. And my routine that day was normal enough for a stand-up comic on the road. I'd arrived by plane. I'd got in on a bus into the town centre, and then I got a taxi out to the B&B close to the club where I was staying that night. Dumped my bags in the B&B and went out to find something to eat before the show. On arriving back at the B&B, I noticed I'd missed a couple of messages, texts from my girlfriend. Them days, it was just them Nokia phones. There was none of this fancy stuff. And she'd asked if I'd heard the news about a bomb in Omagh. I hadn't. So there was this wee small TV in the B&B room I was in that turned it on. And just about every television station was covering the unfolding disaster. It was very clear the destruction and death of this atrocity was of a different magnitude, even by the standards of 30 years of the Troubles. What made it all the more obscene was the fact that the IRA had announced their ceasefire, and everyone had felt that peace had finally arrived. Naturally, I was glued to the television for the next 2 hours, and it seemed that every few minutes things got worse. 29 people died in that attack, with over 200 injured. Innocent men, women, children, and even the unborn lay dead as what happened just grew into a disaster beyond imagination. I now faced a dilemma. Should I, or more importantly, could I, go on stage that night and do my show? Now, my initial and instinctual reaction was to pack my bag and come home. I called friends in the business and chatted about what I should do. Their opinions seemed to be split right down the middle. Some said I should walk, and others said I had to do the show. Eventually, after a lot of heart searching, I decided that I must go ahead. For I felt that if I didn't, the murdering thugs who had planted that bomb would have in some fashion won. So I went on that night and did my job. And I succeeded in hiding my true feelings as the punters in the club laughed. But inside, I noticed that my initial shock began to turn into a burning anger as I perceived that nobody in that club seemed to care about what had just happened in Omagh. Of course, this wasn't true. These were decent people. It was just that for them, Omagh was as distant a place as Bombay or Timbuktu. I had to fight back an overwhelming urge to scream through the mic, "Have you not seen the news? Don't you realise what's just happened?" Of course, I said nothing. Instead, I politely refused to have the complimentary drinks and walked back to my digs in the rain. And that was, and will always be, the hardest gig I've ever done. Nothing will ever be as difficult. And to this day, I'm still unsure if going on stage that night was right or wrong. What the experience did teach me is that those who'd argue this place is just the same as the rest of the UK are either deluded or deliberately blind to the truth. We are viewed by those on the big island as a place and a people apart. This reality hit me like a punch in the stomach as I walked home that night, past dozens of pubs and clubs full of drunken revelers, totally oblivious to the carnage of the 15th of August, 1998, only a few hundred miles away.